How's it going, everyone? We are back again, this time with a bit more of a casual tutorial. Someone in the comments asked if it was possible to add melee attacks to the weapon manager. And the answer to that is yes, it's very possible and super easy. We just need to refactor a few things to make it a bit more manageable. If this is your first time watching, I have a full series on how to make an FPS weapon controller, starting from the built-in kinematic body script all the way up to a fully functional FPS controller that you can use to make games like Doom or Halo. If you've been enjoying this series so far, don't forget to like and subscribe. With all that said, let's get into it and make a melee attack. Okay, so we're back in our project. I've removed the FPS arms or the character rig from this project because it's going to be a little bit easier to do this melee weapons without it. I don't have melee animations on that particular rig. So we're back with our good old-fashioned floating gun rig, and I can demonstrate that here, and I recommend you guys do the same because, like I said in the previous video, it's a lot easier to just prototype these things and then add the rig later because it is very easy to add the rig. So we'll jump over to our FPS character. Now I've already made the animations for these, but I'll show you how they're put together so you guys can get a better idea of how to do this. So it's mostly just playing around with the position and rotation, and what I think works best is that you instantly transition to the striking pose, so 0.2 seconds or 0.1 second even, so you're instantly in that position, and then you linger for like 0.2 seconds. There's a little bit of movement, but there's not a lot. And then you eventually return to that position. And this one does a flip. So you put that all together, it looks like this, where there's that long pause in the melee animation. And I'll show you on a couple of others. Okay, so in the rifle, let's have a look at the melee strike here. We go from this position instantly into this, we linger. There's a little bit of return. I actually think follow through is better than return in this. So I'm not 100% on that one, but you get the idea. You linger, you instantly transition, you have a little bit of lingering, and then you return. So I think that looks really good. We will get to setting up the code for this. I'll just pull the reset on that. Okay, so we'll jump over to the FPS Manager. But before we write any code, we need to come to the project settings and we need to add a new action. I'm just going to call it capital M-E-L-E-E. That's how you spell melee. I have to remember. I'm really bad at spelling, so you have to apologize if I get stuff wrong. I'm going to make it the F key, and that will be the key that we use to do a melee strike. So we can come back into the script, and in the input event, we'll need to add a new event. So we can come right below this and we can go if event.isActionPressed and melee. And we can just write pass because we don't have a function to call yet. So I want it to be probably after reload. I feel like it reads pretty good then. So right. Func, and I'll just call it melee again. Doesn't take any variables, it's nice and simple. Okay, and I'll just type pass, and I'll come back up before we forget. And I'll just write here, and I'll call that function if action press melee. Okay, so let's get into writing the melee function. This one's going to be a little bit different from the others because we're going to allow this to interrupt other actions. So we're going to need to refactor a couple of functions, particularly reload, and we're also going to refactor the camera collision and the hit scan damage because we need to modify them to accept this function and use the Raycasting functions to detect what's in front of us. But before we write anything in the function, we are going to need to add those animations to our weapon resource. So I'm going to open up the weapon resource, which is right here. I'm going to add the animation to the animation variables, which is this top set here. So I'm going to type at export var melee anim, and it's going to be a string. And the other thing that we want to do is under damage, we're going to also add export var melee, can't spell, underscore damage. And so that will be the damage it does. Okay, so in the weapon manager, we're just going to come into each of these, and the naming conventions are the same. So we can go blaster I melee. Blaster D melee. Spell it right. Hit save. I've forgotten to do the damage, so I'll do that for both of those. I'm gonna make it the same as just one. We'll do for now. We'll go blaster N melee and melee damage 1. Okay, and I might change that to be if you guys. This one's all messed up. That's okay. We'll just leave it as is. Okay. So now we've got the animations, we can start writing that function. So we can come back up in here, and we're going to allow this one to interrupt other functions. So we need to write a different line that we normally start with. So normally we're checking to make sure that the animation player isn't even running. But in this case, we only want to make sure that the current animation isn't already the melee animation. So we can't interrupt a melee hit, but we can interrupt pretty much everything else. And if that's a problem, we can always change that later. Animation player dot get current animation, and we're going to make sure that it's not equal to current weapon dot melee underscore anim. So just make sure that this variable name is the same as the variable name in your weapon resource. Okay, and underneath this, we are going to say animation player.play, and it's going to be the current weapon.melee anim. So if you want, you can just copy this and paste it in there. Okay. So let's first make sure that this is running the way that we expect it to. So we can see that. We can shoot, and it will just instantly play. One thing that you'll notice straight away is that we can basically shorten our reload time by interrupting the reload. We're going to fix that in a second. But other than that, it's working how we expected it to. So let's fix that reload thing before we go any further. So the reload is right above us. Now, what we're doing with the reload is we're essentially, we're checking if there's not an animation playing, and then we're just reloading instantly before the animation is finished. So we can just probably copy this variable. We can come up to the on animation finished signal that is being triggered by animation player, and we can add another check here. We can say if anim underscore name is equal to current weapon dot reload anim, and then we'll just put a pass there because I haven't written the function. I'm going to move or refactor this part of the code to be a new function, and so we'll call that function down here. We'll call it calculate underscore reload, and we'll essentially just copy all of this and we'll paste it there. And I'll just remove some of those indentations. You can press Shift Tab to do that, and then where this all is, we can delete that and call, actually we don't even need to call the function, we just delete it all. Okay, and then we will call that function when the animation is finished, not as soon as we press the button. And so that will prevent us from being able to interrupt the reload. So we'll run that again, I'll just reduce some ammo. And now, until I let that finish, doesn't matter what I do, I have to let it run. Maybe you don't want the melee animation to be able to interrupt the reload. It's really up to you if you want to do it this way, or if you want to just make it so the melee can't interrupt the reload. Your call. Otherwise, let's continue. So what we need to do right now is we need to do a raycast from our melee strike to the object in front of us to see if it can be damaged. We've got a function which is right below this called get camera collision that we're going to need to refactor a little bit in order to work with melee and also work with our hit scan weapons and also work with our weapons. So right now the range is just currently being called in the get camera collision function. What we want to do is probably just cut that out and replace it with another variable. We'll just call it _weapon_range, all lowercase, and we'll just put that in the function here, weapon_range. And now it'll also error out at the shoot location because that's where we need to be supplying that variable now. So we can paste that back in, current weapon.weapon range. And now when we do our melee strike, we can also use that function and use a shorter range. So I'm going to go back to the weapon resource and I am going to add that variable, and I'm also going to add the melee damage as well. So under weapon range, I'm going to create another variable. I'm going to call it expert var melee _L range. I'm going to make it a float this time, and I'm also going to make it equal to like 1.5 as a default value because like that's generally good enough. If you want it to be longer, perhaps for like a bigger weapon or something, you can increase it. And the export var, and we'll call this melee_damage. And this can be an int, and I won't give this a default value. We'll need to come back to our weapons and we'll just see they've got the weapon melee range, and I'll just make this 1. Perhaps I could have given it a default value of 1. Okay, so now we've come back there, we can actually write our function here. We can come in and we can go var camera collision is equal to get camera collision, and we'll call current weapon dot melee _range. So now that we can do that, we still need to change our camera collision a little bit further. As you can see right now, we're just returning the position of that intersection, which is not quite what we want. That position is important, but we also want to know what the actual object is that we collided with. Now we're doing this again in hit scan collision, but we don't want to use that function because it's using the bullet point, which is not something that we want to use in the melee section. So we just need the object. We've got it already. It's actually being returned from this function here in the get camera collision. So what we actually want to change this to is to return an array of both the intersection object and its position. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this to be an array. So var collision is actually going to be an array. We'll go square brackets, and it's going to be the collider. I'll put that first. Intersection.collider and intersection.position. Okay, so now we're returning that. It's not happy. I need a comma. Don't forget the comma. Okay, so now we are returning 2 objects for the ray end. We're going to need to return a null at the start because we still need to return an array. We don't want to confuse ourselves. And I'm going to change this to an array as the return object. And then in the shoot, we're going to need to change things here. Rather than sending the camera collision, we just need to send the position like before. So that's the second object in the array. That's number 1. And same with this. It just needs the camera collision position. Run a little test to see if that works. Everything is functioning as normal. That's what we want. Still doing damage, everything like that. So that is positive. Just make sure everything's working when you do these refactors. So this now returns an object, and we can type if camera collision square brackets 0. And now we can calculate the direction. So we can type var direction is equal to, we'll do double brackets here, camera collision, and this will just be the position. So square brackets 1 minus, and I'm going to call the owner dot global transform underscore transform dot origin. The reason for that is just for whatever reason, I found that that was working better than using the weapon manager as the object for the global transform dot origin. Then we'll just type dot normalized. So that's our direction. And then we can just pass in hit scan damage. Now we're going to need to refactor that because that takes a collider, a direction, and a position. So we know what the collider is. We can call camera collision square brackets 0. The direction is the variable we just created, and the position is camera collision 1. But we have another problem here. Hit scan damage is using the current weapon dot damage. We want to replace that with another variable. We'll type weapon underscore weapon underscore damage. And it's going to get upset, so we'll type that up here. It should be happy, and we'll see this have an issue here. And so all we need to do to fix this is just call current weapon dot damage. Once again, just making sure the variable name is the same. And then up here for melee, we can call current weapon dot melee damage. Dot melee damage. That's not a function. Close brackets. Okay, and so now we've separated the damage from hit scan damage. We can call that in a separate location, like in the melee function. And so now we can apply the melee damage when we detect a hit. And so if we run the game now, we just test that out, make sure it's working. It looks like it is. Now we can run over to this box. It's always a good indicator of whether or not things are working. We can come here and we've got a little bit of an error. What have we got? Index, I made a spelling mistake. It's a very common error of mine. Origin. Let's try that again. Just walk straight over to the box this time and you can see it's working properly. Sorry about that error. And so now things look great. We have got it interacting. We can walk over to one of these targets to confirm that it's working. And so now we've got melee damage. How cool is that? And everything seems to be working as normal. One major flaw of the way I'm doing things here that I've thought about a lot and eventually decided this was the better way to go, mostly just for the purposes of what we're doing here, is that we are just using a raycast for this. So if I'm this much off, it's not going to detect a hit because I'm raycasting to the center of the screen, which might not feel very good to the player. So just feel that out, and if you're not happy with it, you probably need to replace it with an area 2D around a wider range, or you need to cast more rays. So there's a couple of options there, but right now, this is what we're going to do just for like an easy one. My assumption is, my reasoning for doing it this way is that because I'm assuming if you're performing a melee attack, chances are the object you're trying to hit is very close to the screen. So it's highly likely that it's going to be covering the center of the screen. Obviously, that's not always the case, and so there's going to be a couple of mishits when you're not quite there, and if you're out of range just a little bit. So that's obviously a range problem, and this is like the problem with the raycast being just from the center. So maybe you need to do more raycast. If you find that's a problem, let me know. I can probably do an updated video where we add an area 3D to detect what's in front of us instead. Or we can refactor the get camera collision to perform more raycasts if we want. That's an option too. But other than that, that's how you do it. Okay guys, that's how I've implemented melee attacks in our FPS weapon controller. How did you go? Let me know down in the comments. As always, if you want to ask questions or leave suggestions, you can jump into the Discord. If you've enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you want to support me further, you can do so on the Patreon. Thanks so much for watching. I'm Isaac from Chaff Games, and I'll see you next time.